Hey there, friends. Karen Pennington here, and I have a very quick thought for you. I submit this to you. The very, very best way to defeat an enemy thoroughly and completely is to create a friend from the enemy. That's a little trickier. It's easier to punch someone than to, be kind to them while they're punching you. Uh, it's effective when you can pull it off. And there are times when we do have to fight for ourselves. There are times when somebody won't change. There are times we have to walk away. But at those times, and it's possible more than we think, that somebody is hurting us, maiming us, rising against us, and we choose to be kind to them anyways and to care for them anyways, it's powerful. My daughter had a habit of taking the very people that either got on her nerves or that genuinely were doing things that they shouldn't to bother her as a child and turning them into her friends. And often very good friends. She had a way of saying to them, no, you can't make me do this. I mean, she would take bullies and turn them into like good people, I think. No, you can't do this to me. But if you want to hang out, we can hang out. And it's like she always spoke with such authority that it worked. I remember she was like a child of, I think, first grade. So and so, I think it was somebody with her name. Allie told me that I should do this, that I had to do this on the playground. And she's very upset about it. She keeps telling everyone they have to do this and we play this game and we have to play this and I don't want to. And she's making me. And I was like, just tell her no. so she went to the playground. She said no. And then something else. So she said, she's trying to make me, well, tell her no. And it was interesting throughout the year, this little girl with Allie's name, who really had started to be a little bit of a bully, ended up becoming a better friend. It's like she respected Allie. Everybody else just was afraid of her, and something in her figured out they don't really like me. They're just afraid of me. And she liked the feeling of having somebody who wouldn't just let her boss them around, but just would play with her. And somehow they became very good friends. It was a cute little girl. I mean, first grade. How much of a bully can you be in first grade? And she just, so they ended up becoming close. And then we moved schools in second grade, and the same thing happened again. There was this little girl that was just trying to boss Allie around, and it was really getting bad. And she, no. And she didn't even ask me about it that time. She just did it, and she told me. I told her no, and it escalated to the point where we had to meet with the principal and the teacher because this girl was just not doing right things. I think the little girl was in there too, and Allie was the one that ended up talking to her and realizing this little girl is just really lonely and she's scared and she thinks the only way she can make friends is by bossing them around. And she's like, so I told her, my little grown up, I told her that's not, people aren't going to like you for that, but I'll play with you. And so she became friends with her. And there were several other times throughout her, it was like she had this gift for taking people that were so hard, who were trying to make her life a living nightmare, and because of her willingness to stand up to them, not fight them, but be kind to them, but refuse to do what she had them do, over and over again, they just turned into friends. I see her doing it. And it almost seems like, it almost was like as soon as she came home and told me about somebody who she thought was being inappropriate, who, for one reason or another, I'm sure there was some of her in this too, she didn't like them, I don't like them. They ended up, those are the ones that are her friends 10 years later, that they trust each other and are committed to each other. It's the craziest thing. It's like she almost got attracted to the idea of, okay, this person is not allowed to be my enemy. I'm going to make them my friend, whether they like it or not. It was really cool. And it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes people don't let you do that, but she had this gift for that. And I thought about it this morning because I was reading about King David, because he seemed to do that too. It was a little bit more difficult for him. You see, the nation of Israel had 12 tribes to it. And out of one tribe, the tribe of Benjamin, came King Saul. King Saul started out pretty well. Started messing up pretty quickly. And, as with most things, it wasn't so much that he made mistakes. He made some pretty big mistakes. So did David. But he wasn't willing to come back. His way of dealing with his mistakes was trying to defeat other people. It's like, have you ever gone down that rabbit hole where I'm going to fix one mistake by making a bigger mistake? I'm going to fix one lie by telling a bigger lie. Instead of just coming clean and starting with a fresh slate, it's like, let's dirty my slate up even more to where point where it's obliterated. So Paul just kept doing that. Saul just kept doing that. There wasn't a King Paul. And it got to the point where he was rejected as king. It's like, I've taken it off. God's like, no, and I'm done. And not only was Saul rejected as king, his whole house, the house of Benjamin, and the house of Saul in this tribe of Benjamin, no more, period. And in his place, he got this young shepherd boy from the house of Judah, close by. Now, one thing you should know about the house of Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin within Israel, they were feisty. If you were to read the book of Judges, which came before Samuel, when we were the book of Samuel, when we were talking about Saul and David, they just started wars. Like, it was like hair trigger. Like, those hair trigger people that you look at them the wrong way and they'll come punch you in the face. It's like that. It was not hard to get them to want to fight you. They did not seem loyal. A lot of times, there were several times where it's like everybody else in Israel fought against the house of Benjamin. They were not the peaceful tribe. Let's put it that way, of the 12 tribes of Israel. So Paul, why do I keep saying Paul? Saul was very similar in this aspect. When God rejected him, instead of him repenting, instead of him coming back and doing better things, he fought against the one that he saw God's new anointing on. He wasn't really nice. David's winning battles for him. David's playing the harp because he's starting to go crazy because of all of his, sin and rebellion and knowing God's taken his hand off of me. David was so loyal to him. And he just kept, he literally would throw spears at David. David's playing this harp to try and calm him, and he's throwing spears at him. Thing is, David's playing this harp for him even while he's going out and leading his armies and leading Saul to victory. And Saul was great with it as long as he could get the credit. As soon as David came back and they decided David was a better warrior than Saul, then Saul's like, I got to kill him. So David would be playing the harp multiple times, and Saul would just throw a spear at him. Who does that? Even in the ancient world, who throws spears at their harpists? And then it got to the point where David had to escape. And even though he had led Saul to victory, Saul went after him. And it got to the point where David got help at the city of Nob from people that didn't know Saul was after him. He was leading Saul's army. Why would they know any difference? Saul killed all the priests, killed the whole city just because they gave help to the person who was in charge of his army because they didn't know that he was going after him for no good reason. So, he just had this vengeance. He was out for blood. He killed these people for no good reason. 10 years. We're not talking about a little vendetta. 10 years. For 10 years, David, the warrior, the conqueror of nations, the one who built Israel bigger than it had ever been, the one who killed a bear without a gun or a sword, the one who killed Goliath, the champion, the 9-foot tall champion, as a teenager who had never fought in a war and had no army and only had a couple stones. This brave heart just ran for 10 years. It wasn't because he was a coward. He lived in the wilderness. He lived in caves. He lived in other countries. It wasn't because he was a coward. David was a lot of things, but never did coward cross anyone's lips to talk about him. He fled from Saul because he still recognized Saul is God's anointed. God anointed him at some point, whether or not he likes him now. And I know that I'm supposed to be king, but I'm not going to do it this way. I'm not going to become a king by killing another king. I'm not going to become a victor by killing somebody that God had put his hand on. I'm not going to kill my wife's father. I'm not going to kill my best friend's father. I'm not going to kill somebody who was a dad to me. He's messed up. I don't like him. And he said, this is God's anointed. If he dies, he's not dying by my hand. When he dies, he's not dying by my hand. So eventually Saul is defeated. He falls on his own sword. Somebody else ends up having to kill him because he's like sitting there bleeding and dying. And Dave has an end to try to get into the kingdom. There is a little bit of civil war, but it was known that David was anointed as the next king. So given that, David started to fight to take his place as the next king. And there was war between him and the Benjaminites. There were some battles. But in the process, even now being in a war against the house of Saul and the Benjaminites, David executed the person who said that he had killed Saul. And then someone else killed Saul's son. He executed the person that said they had killed him. The leader of Saul's army ended up getting one over to David. He said, this person is better than me, better than what I'm going for. And when he died, David mourned him and had a funeral. David moved the capital city, which was in the area of the tribe of Judah. He moved the capital city to the area of Benjamin. And then he had a nice long parade to take the ark into the city, the Ark of the Covenant, which was a sign of God's presence. He just kept showing kindness and kindness and kindness and kindness. He defended himself, but he never attacked. He kept showing honor to the idea that this person was anointed. He kept showing honor to what Saul had done for him, even though Saul spent far more time trying to hurt him. And then even after that, 2 Samuel chapter 9. David asks, is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? He'd already established himself as king. He'd already won the hearts of the Benjaminites, who never followed like anybody. They were the ones that fought with all the kingdoms. And now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They called him to appear before David, and the king said to him, are you Ziba? Your servant, he replied. The king said, is there no one still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness? God's kindness. Isn't that interesting? I'm going to be God to this person. Ziba answered, there's still a son of Jonathan. He's crippled in both feet. Where is he? The king asked. He's at the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lo-debar. So King David had brought him from Lo-debar, from the house of Machir, son of Amiel. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. David said, Mephibosheth, your servant, he replied. Don't be afraid, David said to him, for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul. Saul was king. He owned a lot. And you will always eat at my table. Didn't stop there. Verse 9. Then the king summoned Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crop, so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth, the grandson of your master, will always eat at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. So David had already won, and he had already shown great kindness and honor to Saul. And taking over that position as anointed one, as the king, he had rights over the land that the king had gained. Mephibosheth, if there was any vestige of anything in terms of the line of Saul, Mephibosheth was the only son left of the oldest son of Saul. He was the one in line. Jonathan, Mephibosheth's father, was in line to the throne, and Mephibosheth would have been in line to the throne. So not only was he in line to Saul's throne, for anybody who thought it was legitimate, I mean, he was easy pickings. When everybody else was fleeing, his nursemaid dropped him. He was lame in both feet. I mean, can't go anywhere if David wants to get him. And, ancient rules, even sometimes modern rules, would dictate, finish him off. This is the last of any threat you have to you. Certainly, Saul saw David as a threat even when he was loyal. He finished him off. But instead, he showed such extravagant kindness. He gave him 36 servants in all of Saul's land. He said, you're never going to lack food at your table, but you're welcome at mine. So let me tell you what happened. David's son Solomon was really wise until he was dumb. And so God would not rip the kingdom from Solomon because of David. But then Solomon's son, Rehoboam, was just unwise to begin with. He followed his young friend's advice rather than the advice of wisdom. He decided to try to dominate rather than serving the people that he was called to be king of. And because of that, the kingdom was ripped from his hands. And the kingdom of Israel was split into the northern kingdom, which they really called Israel, and the southern kingdom of Judah. Only one tribe of the 12, or of the other 11, stuck with Judah, the tribe of Judah and the king of Judah, even through all the king's, disobedience, stupidity, whatever you want to call it. That was the tribe of Benjamin. So thorough was David's kindness, at a great cost to himself. 10 years as an outlaw. So thorough was his kindness to the house of Benjamin, to the house of Saul, that they were the one tribe that stuck with Judah to the very end. None of the other tribes ever came back. Now there was a king that wasn't quite so wise. Next chapter. David actually had a lot of kings that he had alliances with. One of them was the king of the Ammonites, because he was smart enough to know, I don't want him to beat me up. So they traded very regularly, and they had a good relationship. And when that king died, David sent people to say, to send condolences. I'm so sorry this happened, to send their respects. And this king's son, Hanun, came, and the Ammonite nobles said to Hanun, do you think David is honoring your father by sending men to you to express sympathy? Hasn't David sent them to you to explore the city and spy it out and overthrow it? So, here's a different approach. Hanun seized David's men, shaved off half of each man's beard, cut off their garments in the middle of the buttocks, I'm not making this up, and sent them away. The funny thing here is I think they were more embarrassed about the beard than about their derriere showing. Because to shave a beard, or even to shave a head, but mostly shave a beard, that was a sign of honor. So they were dishonoring and shaming them. You didn't do that. You didn't shave a beard. So, when the Ammonites realized that they had become a stench in David's nostrils, they apologized and threw themselves at his mercy. And no! What it says here is they hired 20,000 Aramean foot soldiers from Beth Rahab and Zobah, as well as king of Makkah, with 1,000 men and also 12,000 men from Tob. So not only have they cost themselves trade, very, very lucrative trade, with the most powerful ally in the area, they then had to pay for 33,000 troops. 33,000 troops. And they're like, okay, we'll surround them on all sides. Well, God was with Israel. Let's not even talk about what good warriors they were at that point, because it was a bunch of people who had to fight for their lives for 10 years when they were running from Saul. These are the same people that were in David's army. And so they come up against him. David's main guy, Job, verse 10, 12, be strong and let us fight bravely for our people in the cities of our God. The Lord will do what is good in his sight. So Job fought the people on his side. They fled. Job's brother fought the people on his side, and it said when David was told of this, he gathered all of Israel, crossed the Jordan, and went to Halam. The Arameans formed their battle lines to meet David and fought against him. But they fled before Israel, and David killed 700 of their charioteers and 40,000 of their foot soldiers. He also struck down Shobach, the commander of the army, and he died there. When all the kings who were vassals of Hadadezer, or Hobab, saw that they had been defeated by Israel. They made peace with Israel and became subject to them. So some dude's going to try to bully David, who's trying to be his friend. And he's going to hire 33,000 soldiers. Not only did all of those soldiers flee, the ones who weren't killed, he lost 40,000 of his own soldiers, 700 chariots, and everyone who had served him now served David. He decided he was going to defeat an enemy that didn't even exist. And he ended up ruining himself. How often do we do that, actually? This very unwise Aramean, how often do we neglect to celebrate the things that we do have, that God has given us? How often do we put all of our resources into fighting a war that doesn't even exist? How often do we spend time not forgiving somebody? And unforgiveness is someone who didn't even know they did something wrong against us. Or someone who's moved on. Who may have even apologized. And we just can't let it go. We can't let it go. And we create. There was no war here. There was no war. There was a powerful king who wanted to be his friend. And he decided, I want to make myself look more powerful than him, so I'm going to try to bully people. And he lost everything. Talk about pride going before the fall. Now, Dave wasn't always so smart. He wasn't always so wise. The very next chapter begins with, in the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab. Guess what happened when he was home? He started looking where he wasn't supposed to be looking. He was certainly staying where he shouldn't have been staying, walking where he shouldn't have been walking, and he saw naked women bathing because he was up top. She was in private, and he started staring at a naked woman in private. When he found out she was married, he didn't care. He took her anyways. And then when he got her pregnant, he sent his army into a war he knew they couldn't win just so that her husband would die. There was one step before that. He tried to hide it by getting her husband drunk and trying to get him to impregnate, make it look like he impregnated her himself. And when the husband showed that he was more honorable than David because he said, I'm supposed to be at war. It's not fair that I enjoy my wife while my comrades are at war. Then he said, okay, I'll have you killed instead. I'll call it war. It's interesting how we fight our battles, isn't it? It's interesting. How even sometimes the smallest kindnesses are extravagant kindnesses. That's the best battle plan. Sometimes looks as weakness. David did something with Mephibosheth, with Jonathan's son, that may have come across as weakness to others. He's your enemy. Get rid of him. At the very least, leave him alone. And yet that was part of the strength of his kingdom. It was the only part of the kingdom that stayed with him when everything else fell. And then David's enemy wanted so much to show how strong he was, to defeat someone who wasn't even against him, that in his grasping at getting more, as his desire to fight a war that didn't exist until he made it, lost everything. The only thing I can think of is there's definitely wisdom in fighting battles God's ways, God's way. Let's pray. God, thank you for your wisdom. Things aren't always so clear cut for us. Sometimes we see a war where there's peace. Sometimes we just want to fight and you're telling us to be kind. We really need your wisdom every day, God. You say in your word to trust in you and not lean on our own understanding, to always acknowledge you and you'll make our path straight. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, Lord. May that be the rule of our heart today. May we just seek you in all things, and may we ask you. And we know that when we ask and when we honestly seek, you'll never let us down, God. Thank you so much. Amen. Be blessed, my friends.